Hey everybody, Jiu Jitsu Off the Ground, Episode 3 is a quick book report. I just finished reading the Book of Five Rings and the Family Traditions on the Art of War by Miyamoto Musashi. And there are two separate books actually, and that's what's kind of interesting here, is that there's sort of a contrast of styles between Musashi and Yagyu Muninori. The two were direct contemporaries in the latter 16th and early 17th centuries. Musashi, though, was a professional jeweler and ultimately a masterless samurai, a ronin, an independent teacher of martial arts. And Muninori had been a swordsman and soldier who ended up being a sort of counsel to the shogun and teacher of his children. And so one definitely has a more sort of courtly way, whereas the other is, I don't want to say more practical, because ultimately there's a lot of practical advice that I think we as Jiu-Jiteros would find pretty familiar. At the same time, it's interesting because they're swordsmen and generals. For them, martial arts exist in this sort of smaller sphere as far as what you would do, between yourself and an individual combatant. As swordsmen, they also have, some advice as far as multiple combatants, and then these principles as they can be sort of generalized to larger scale conflict. Of the two, I would say that I personally prefer the family traditions. I think because it's got a little bit more of the sort of Zen aspect to it. Interestingly, both authors sort of sometime around the age of 50 or 60 said they felt like that's when they really understood the role that martial arts had played in their life as a sort of development piece. I continue to have some fun with the bullet journal method, and to sort of stack the two books up side by side was kind of fun for me. So the Book of Five Rings, which apparently from a translation perspective might also be the Book of Five Spheres, is divided between five scrolls: the Earth Scroll, the Water Scroll, the Fire Scroll, the Wind Scroll, and the Scroll of Emptiness. And in effect, and according to the translator here, there's two sort of primary themes for Musashi. One is maintaining an inner calm despite chaos, and two, remembering the possibility of disorder in times of order. Certainly that would seem to be appropriate advice to ours or any era. Whereas Family Traditions on the Art of War is divided into three sections. The first, the Killing Sword, the Life-Giving Sword, and then No Sword. And as you can see in my little notes here, the Killing Sword is about the use of force to sort of bring order. Life-Giving Sword is about sort of prevention and sensing, like, as Musashi calls it, holding down the pillow. And in a passage that's kind of fun, he tries to describe it as sort of, if you're holding down the pillow, you're sort of intervening at the first letter of each of the words prior in this sentence. Finally, for Muninori, No Sword is the sort of environment around you. And I think not just as metaphor, he's talking about if you were unarmed and your opponent had a weapon, how would you be using the space around you, in part to ensure that you were able to not be struck and get the weapon from them. A few favorite quotes here from Musashi. Generally speaking, fixation and binding are to be avoided in both the sword and the hand. Fixation is the way to death. Fluidity is the way to life. I won't bother to quote it at length, but the body of the short-armed monkey I thought was both appropriate to some of our training partners. And the point that was being emphasized was kind of like in Jiu-Jitsu, this concept of T-Rex arms, and keeping your upper arms kind of as close to your body as possible so they don't get isolated. And the point is simply no reaching. Also worth reading in full is a short passage on stabbing the face, which the point was just to the extent that your opponent is constantly afraid that you're going to be stabbing them in the face, they're going to be hard-pressed to mount an offense. I absolutely loved this one. When you master an art or science, your performance does not appear fast. And in the passage, he talks about the performance of music or dance also. But in terms of what a lot of
upper level combatants look like, an upper level sport looks like. It looks so easy, you don't see how they could do that without excess movement. I just thought it was a great quote. And finally, totally appropriate to Jujiteros, although of course he's talking about swordsmanship, there is no such thing as the ultimate guard. It is only a matter of understanding its effective qualities in your heart and mind. This is what is essential to martial art. From Munenori, there's a lot more about sort of Zen and martial arts, and in its own way, he sort of highlights the imperfect overlay there. But as practical advice, he indicates lower your center of gravity securely and do not let your mood become hurried or aggressive. It is essential to control your mood by means of your will, calming down so that your will is not drawn by your mood. In this section on mental and physical aggressiveness, entitled Mental and Physical Aggressive and Passive Modes, he says, the mind should be in the passive mode, the body in the aggressive mode. The reason for this is that if the mind is in the aggressive mode, you will rush, and that is wrong. Therefore, you control the mind and keep it impassive while using physical aggressiveness to get the opponent to make the first move, and thus you gain victory. If the mind is aggressive, you will lose by trying to kill your opponent right away. In another sense, it can be understood that the mind is to be in the aggressive mode and the body in the passive mode. The point of this is to cause your mind to work intently, putting the mind in an aggressive mode while keeping your sword passive, getting your adversary to make the first move. The body can be understood to mean the hands that hold the sword. Thus it is said that the mind is aggressive while the body is passive. Although there are two meanings, ultimately the sense is the same. In any case, you win by inducing your opponent to take the initiative. In the section entitled Hit and Be Hit At, he says, it is easy to kill someone with the slash of a sword. It is hard to be impossible for others to cut down. Noting the tempo, induce the adversary to take the initiative, whereupon you let him hit out at you, and thus strike him down.
And finally, for Munenori, in the section on martial arts and Buddhism, he says that basically there are many things in martial arts that accord with Buddhism and correspond to Zen. In particular, there is repudiation of attachment and avoidance of lingering on anything. This is the most urgent point. Not lingering is considered quintessential. I think it's interesting that Cleary, the translator, actually highlights that the intersection of Buddhism or Zen and the martial arts is very imperfect. For him, as he points out, basically, if martial arts had been the highest calling in medieval Japan, then Zen masters would be learning from them, not the other way around. And I feel like what we're seeing in our own time is this sort of sense of we sort of have to hold things at a remove right now and work our minds and our bodies in the ways that we can to sort of remain in these moments. You know, for a lot of us, I think my favorite meme that I've seen has been this one that's like after 2 weeks of quarantine and how every jujitero is like stepping up out of a wheelchair into like a rising sun, you know. And, there are, I mean, they're not exactly, they're externalities. You'd hesitate to call them upsides, but they are nevertheless consequences of where we are right now, and they seem to be working out in their own way. I'm reminded of the Sun Tzu quote from The Art of War about in defense the possibility of attack, and it seems like in terms of where our society is and dealing with what we're dealing with right now, it's like we just have to be in that defensive mode. Certainly happy to hear your thoughts. Thanks for spending a little time with me today, and I will see you soon.